They said the vampire king kept his chamber warm while the rest of his castle slept in winter. They said he did it with stolen heat, stolen breath, stolen years, because that was what frightened people did when they wanted a story to fit neatly in their mouths. In the villages under the northern cliffs, mothers made their children promise they would never look up at the black ridge where the castle crouched. Traders who passed the old road kept their eyes on their horses, ears and their hands on their charms. Even the priests, who should have been brave by trade, spoke the king's name like a prayer turned backward. His name was Alaric Veyl. And when my cart broke a wheel in the first snow of early dusk, and the wind began to shove the pines like impatient giants, Alaric Veyl was the last refuge I wanted to find. I wasn't meant to be on that road. I was a bath attendant in the monastery town of Larkhaven, accustomed to steam and herbs, soft towels, quiet talk. My hands knew how to soothe cramped shoulders and rinse soap from someone else's hair. I knew nothing about kings, least of all one that everyone called a monster. But my sister had fallen ill, and the only apothecary who could make the tincture she needed lived across the ridge. I had borrowed a mule, piled jars and linens into a cart, and sworn to be home before the second night. Now the wheel lay crooked like a broken wrist, and the cold came on with a deliberate patience, the kind that didn't rush because it always won. I tried to fix it. I tried to be brave. I tried to pretend I was not listening for wolves, not watching the tree line for anything that moved with intention. In the end, I did what fear always pushes you toward. I walked uphill toward the silhouette of the castle because it was the only shape that promised walls. The gate was open. That should have been the first sign that the stories were incomplete. A castle feared by the world should not have its mouth unguarded. But the iron bars had been pulled aside, as if someone expected a guest, as if no one needed to be stopped because no one intended harm here. Snow lay untouched in the gate's shadow. No blood, no bones, no warning. Inside, the air held a faint warmth like a held breath. Lanterns burned with steady blue-white flames set into wall sconces. No servants appeared, no guards approached. Only silence met me, large, careful silence, the kind that did not want to startle. I called out once, my voice thin in the high hall, "Hello, is anyone here?" My own words seemed embarrassed to echo. The floor was polished black stone veined with silver. It reflected my boots and the hem of my cloak, reflecting me as though the castle wanted proof I was real. Somewhere deeper, water murmured. That sound of all things drew me forward. A bathhouse sound, familiar and domestic like my town's public steams. I followed it through corridors that should have been cold and weren't. The walls were hung with tapestries that didn't show battles as I expected, but forests in spring, birds at the edge of ponds, a child's hand reaching for a falling petal. It felt wrong in a quiet way, like finding a lullaby hidden inside an iron box. At the end of a hallway stood a door half ajar. Pale light spilled from it, and the air smelled of crushed rosemary and something darker, clove perhaps, or dried roses. I knocked, no answer. I pushed the door open and saw the bathing chamber. The bath itself was sunk into the floor like a private pool, its surface steaming. Candles drifted in shallow bowls along the rim, their flames steady and unafraid of draughts. A shelf held folded towels as white as fresh snow. A brush lay beside a dish of soap shaved into delicate curls. It looked prepared. It looked like someone had made it that way with intention. And in my numbness and exhaustion, in the foolish relief of warmth after biting wind, I did something I would later wonder about in sleepless hours. I stepped inside as if I belonged. I closed the door because cold makes you selfish. I unfastened my cloak because wet wool is a misery. I slipped my boots off because my feet had gone past pain into that strange, dangerous quiet. It's just a bath, I told myself aloud, as if the sound of my voice could keep the fear outside. Just a bath. There was a screen of carved wood by the wall, and behind it a place to undress. I moved through the motions my body knew, unpin hair, fold clothes, set them neatly. A habit from the monastery baths, leave things ordered so the world feels ordered too. When I slid into the water, warmth closed over me like forgiveness. I didn't mean to cry, but the heat found the tight places in my chest and loosened them, and suddenly tears ran down my face without permission. I covered my mouth, embarrassed even with no one there. That was when the door opened. Not flung wide, not slammed, opened with the gentle patience of someone who feared startling a bird. I froze, water up to my collarbones. My heart seemed to thud louder than the candle flames. A figure stepped into the chamber and paused, as if he had expected emptiness and found something fragile instead. He stood with his hand still on the door, not crossing further. He was tall but not in an imposing way, more like a tree, rooted, inevitable, shaped by time rather than muscle. His hair was dark, tied back with a few strands loose as if he'd been reading or thinking and forgotten to be neat. His skin was pale, yes, but like moonlit marble, not corpse pale. His eyes were the kind of grey that carried too much weather. He did not bear fangs, he did not smile. He simply looked at me with an expression that was almost tired. I didn't know, I whispered. I thought no one was. His gaze shifted to the folded cloak, the boots by the screen, the steam fogging the air. He took in the scene as if measuring harm. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet enough to belong to the candlelight. "You're cold," he said, not a question. A fact spoken with the same calm use about snow or night. I admitted, as if I needed to explain myself to a stranger in a castle everyone feared. "My cart broke. I didn't mean to. This is your..." "My chamber," he finished, not with anger but with something like resignation. "Yes." The word should have slammed down like a verdict. Instead, it felt like the way someone acknowledges a spilled cup without scolding, simply noticing what is. "I can leave," I said quickly. "Right now I'll..." He lifted a hand, palm outward. The gesture was not commanding. It was stopping a child from running into the street. "The road beyond my gates is not safe after dusk," he said. "The snow will deepen by midnight. The wolves are less cruel than the men who hunt this ridge. Stay where it's warm." My throat tightened. Are you the king?" He looked at the bathwater, not at me, as if he offered his answer to the steam rather than to my fear. "I am Alaric," he said at last, "and yes, they call me king." I had heard the name whispered like a curse. Hearing it spoken plainly in a gentle voice felt like finding a blade wrapped in cloth. I forced myself to lift my chin. "Everyone says you don't let people leave." And a pause. "They say many things," he replied. "Some are true, most are stories people tell to make their fear feel useful." His eyes flicked briefly to my face, quick, careful, like someone checking whether I was about to faint. Then he turned slightly, angling his body away from the bath as if to grant me dignity. "I will have a room prepared," he said. "When you are finished, ring the bell by the towels. Someone will bring you food." "There are servants," I blurted before I could stop myself. A shadow of something passed over his expression, amusement perhaps or sadness. "There are people," he corrected softly. "Not all who live here are seen." Then he left, closing the door with the same gentle patience. I sat in the bath until the water cooled, staring at the candles floating in their bowls. My hands shook, not from cold now, but from the impossibility of what had happened. A monster, arriving to find an intruder, had told her to stay warm. I dressed slowly, half expecting the door to burst open, half expecting the floor to drop away. Nothing happened. When I rang the bell, it chimed once, a low, clear note. Minutes later, a young woman appeared carrying a tray. She looked human, wind-chapped cheeks, dark curls escaping her cap. She didn't meet my eyes at first, as if she'd been trained not to look too directly at guests or at fear. "Soup," she said, setting it on a small table. "Bread, dried pears." "Thank you," I whispered. She hesitated, then glanced up. Her eyes were an ordinary brown, and the relief of that ordinariness nearly undid me. "You're not," I began, then stopped, not wanting to insult her with a question that felt sharp. She understood anyway. "I'm not like him," she said, voice level. "Neither are most of us. We live here because the king allows it." "Allows," I echoed, tasting the word. "Why would anyone choose this place?" Her hands tightened on the edge of the tray. "Some of us didn't choose, some did. There are worse places to be unwanted." Then she was gone. I ate the soup because it was hot, and because my body, practical as a mule, insisted on survival regardless of my thoughts. Afterward I was led, Not by guards, but by a silent older man with a lantern, to a guest room with a fire already lit and blankets folded down as if someone had measured my height. Sleep came in pieces. In the night I woke to a faint sound outside my door, like cloth moving, like footsteps that didn't want to be footsteps. I held my breath, listening. Through the crack beneath the door I saw no light, only shadow shifting. Someone was out there keeping watch. In the morning, snow made the world white and harmless looking. The castle, seen in daylight, was less a fortress and more an old home built too high. The windows were tall and clean. The courtyard held a small garden asleep beneath straw and frost. Smoke rose from several chimneys, thin as thread. No one barred my path when I wandered. No one snatched my wrist. There was fear in me, yes, but it had nowhere to land. The castle was quiet in a way that suggested careful listening. In the kitchen I found the young woman from last night stirring a pot. She jumped when she saw me, then relaxed. "You should stay near the hearth," she said, as if giving advice to someone who didn't know winter. "I can't stay long," I told her. "My sister, she needs medicine, I have to cross the ridge." At that she grimaced. "Not today, the pass is closed. The king will not let anyone go over in this weather." There it was, the story's hook, the familiar fear. "So everyone was right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He won't let me leave." She set down her spoon. "He won't let you die on his mountain," she corrected. "Those are different things." I stared at her, unsure how to argue with a sentence that sounded like truth. Later, in a corridor lined with tall windows, I found Alaric standing alone, looking out over the snowfields below. He held a cup in his hand, tea perhaps, though the steam was faint. He looked as if he had not slept. He heard me approach, though my steps were soft. "You ate," he said without turning. "Yes. Good." I waited, then asked the question that had been pressing against my ribs since nightfall. "Why did you leave the gate open?" He turned then slowly. Up close he didn't seem young, though his face was unlined. He seemed like something that had been made and remade by years, carrying weight without showing strain. "Because the road is dangerous," he said, "and because I have learned that if I close my doors, people will still come. They will climb walls and cut themselves on iron, and then they will bleed and blame me for it." "That sounds unkind," I said before I could soften it. He accepted the words without flinching. "It is practical. Everyone thinks you take travelers." A small silence fell between us. His gaze drifted past me, as if watching the memory of a road. "Sometimes," he said, "someone comes here who would not survive another mile. Sometimes I keep them until the storm ends. Sometimes until their fear ends. Sometimes until their pursuers stop looking." My fingers curled into my palm. Pursuers. His eyes met mine, and for an instant I felt the full weight of what he was. Not a man playing at power, but something ancient enough to have seen human cruelty repeat until it became predictable. "Not all monsters have fangs," he said softly. I should have asked then why he cared. I should have demanded to be released, insisted on my errand. Instead I found myself asking, "What do you take from them?" He blinked once, as if the question surprised him. Then his mouth curved, not into a smile exactly, but into something gentler than neutrality. "I take their names," he said, "so I can remember them." That answer should not have made my throat burn, but it did. "My name is Elowen," I said, the words escaping without calculation. "Elowen Veyl." He inclined his head, a small formal gesture. "Elowen Veyl, you came for medicine." "Yes, for my sister Mara." His gaze sharpened, focused now. "How old?" "Late." He was silent for a moment, then turned away from the window. "Come," he said. He led me not deeper into darkness, but down a staircase that opened into a bright hall filled with books. A library, vast and orderly, smelling of paper and wax. On a table lay bundles of dried herbs labelled in neat script. Mortars, scales, tiny glass vials. "An apothecary's space." "I thought you had no servants," I said quietly. "I said there are people," he replied. He moved to a shelf and drew down a jar of pale bark. His hands were precise, gentle with the contents. "Once a healer lived here. She is gone now. the work remains. He measured, crushed, mixed, the motions practiced as if learned long ago. As he worked, he spoke in the same calm voice, not performing, not explaining for praise. Mara's fever, did it break at all? No, it comes in waves. A cough. Sometimes. He nodded, adding a pinch of something that smelled like mint and earth. When he handed me the small vial, it was wrapped in cloth and tied with string. 2 drops in warm water, he said. Once in the morning, once at night. Do not give more, even if you are afraid. I clutched it like a relic. You just have this. I keep what I can, he said. Why? The question came out raw now, all my restraint eroded by the simple mercy of his hands. Why help at all if the world fears you? For the first time, something in him seemed to loosen, as if the question touched a place he usually kept locked. Because I remember being feared, he said quietly, and I remember being helped anyway. He looked down at his own hands, as if seeing an old stain that no one else could see. When I was turned, he continued, I was young. I woke hungry and horrified by myself. I did not know what I was. I ran from villages and lived in caves like a wounded animal. People hunted me with torches. They called it righteousness. He spoke without bitterness, simply stating whether again, this happened then this. One night, he said, a woman found me. She was a midwife. She had been cast out for failing to save a lord's child. She should have killed me. She should have screamed. Instead, she brought me bread and held a lantern so I could see my own trembling hands. I listened, barely breathing. She taught me how to live without taking, he said. How to bear hunger without turning it into someone else's suffering. She made me promise that if I ever had power, I would use it to shelter those the world was eager to discard. He lifted his eyes to mine. I have broken many promises in my life, Elowen Veyl, but not that one. The castle's calm suddenly made sense. The open gate, the unseen watch in the night, the servants who were people, living here because somewhere else had refused them. Outside, a gust of snow swept past the window like a white veil. I tightened my grip on the vial. Then let me go, I whispered. Please, my sister. I will, he said, when the pass is safe. My town will think I'm dead, I said, voice shaking. They will think you took me. He looked away, and that small movement carried a weary acceptance. They already think that, he murmured. It is easier for them than believing I might have done you kindness. A day passed, then another. The castle did not become a prison, though my impatience tried to paint it that way. No one locked my door. No one threatened me. Yet the gates remained open not for leaving, but for the illusion of leaving. The road beyond was a white, lethal blank. I stood once at the threshold, staring into the wind, and understood that freedom is sometimes only another name for danger. In those days, I saw what the world didn't. I saw Alaric in the courtyard at dawn, kneeling in the snow beside the straw-covered garden, his bare hands moving gently as he checked the sleeping plants. I watched from an upper window, confused. Why would a vampire care for herbs? Later I learned the garden fed the kitchen, and the herbs fed the apothecary table. I saw him in the library at night, reading by candlelight, his face softened by concentration. He made notes in the margins of old medical texts, not about curses or conquest, but about tinctures, fevers, the safest way to set a broken bone. Once I found a child in the hallway, small, thin, perhaps 5, pressing her ear to a door. She wore a dress too large, sleeves rolled up. When she saw me, she flinched, ready to run. It's all right, I said softly, crouching. Are you lost? She hesitated, then whispered, Is he angry? As who? The king, she breathed, as if the word might break. They said he eats children. My heart clenched. Has he hurt you? She shook her head quickly. He gave me milk and a ribbon. She touched her hair where a scrap of blue cloth was tied. But I heard him walking last night. I thought maybe he changed his mind. I swallowed, fighting the ache. He was walking because he was making sure you were safe, I said, not because he wanted to scare you. She stared at me as if she wanted to believe it but didn't know how. Then she whispered, Do you think he's lonely? The question felt like a candle lit in a dark room, small, brave, revealing too much. I think, I said carefully, he's been alone a long time. That night I saw Alaric again outside my door. I opened it before I could talk myself out of it. He stood there, not startled, as if he had known I would. "You don't sleep," I said. His gaze flicked past me into the room, checking, habit, not intrusion. "Not as you do. Do you stand watch for everyone?" He was quiet long enough that I wondered if he would answer. Then he said, "For those who are new, they wake afraid. Night makes fear loud." "And who watches you?" The question came out before I could temper it. For the first time, something like real emotion crossed his face, so quick it might have been imagined. A flicker of old pain quickly banked. "No one," he said simply. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Then at least come in and sit by the fire for a moment. You don't have to speak." He looked at the threshold as if it were a line drawn in salt. "You should not invite me," he said quietly. "I'm inviting you to be warm," I replied. "Not to do anything else. I know what people say, I also know what I've seen." His eyes rested on mine, searching for fear. Perhaps he found some. I was still human, still full of instinct. But he must have found something else too, because after a moment he stepped inside, moving as if careful not to disturb the air. He sat in the chair near the hearth, hands folded, posture more like a sentinel than a guest. The firelight softened the sharp planes of his face. For a while we listened to the crackle of wood. In that silence, the castle felt less like a legend, and more like a place built around one man's long decision to do harm to no one, even when the world insisted harm was his nature. "You could leave," I said eventually. "Disappear, let them fear an empty castle." "I did," he said, voice low. "Once, for 20 years I fled into forests and ruins, and every time I left something happened, a plague in the valley, a warlord taking this pass and taxing the poor until they starved. A winter when travelers froze because there was no open gate and no warm hall." He stared into the fire as if reading names there. "I came back," he said, "not because I wanted a throne, because I learned that my presence, however hated, kept worse things away." The idea settled into me like snow settling on branches, quiet, weighty. The feared king as a shield, taking hatred as the price of protection. "And the blood?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "Do you?" His jaw tightened slightly, not with anger but with restraint. "There are ways," he said. "Donations from those who choose in exchange for shelter and wages, animal blood from hunters. Old stores carefully kept. Hunger is a constant companion, Elowen hail, but it does not rule me." He looked at me then, and there was something almost like apology in his eyes. "I do not pretend to be harmless, I am simply disciplined." "I've met harmless men who did terrible things," I murmured, thinking of the stories of hunters and righteous torches. "And I've met you." His gaze lowered. "Do not make me better than I am," he said softly. "It is dangerous for both of us." "I'm not," I answered. "I'm just noticing." On the fourth morning the wind softened. The clouds lifted, revealing a pale sun like a coin behind gauze. The servants, people, moved through the halls with a different energy, as if the castle itself exhaled. Alaric met me at the gate with a cloak folded over his arm. The snow beyond the walls was still deep, but the path had been cleared in a narrow line, shovel marks crisp. 2 horses waited, saddled, their breath steaming. "You're coming?" I asked before I could stop the hope from sounding like surprise. "I will take you to the ridge," he said. "Not beyond, the villagers will not welcome me." "They might if they saw." "No," he said gently, and the firmness in that single syllable told me he had tried before long ago. "Your people have their stories. If I walk into their streets, fear will turn them into something they will regret." He draped the cloak over my shoulders. It was heavier than mine, lined with fur, smelling faintly of cedar. "This belonged to the midwife," he said, voice nearly lost in the cold air. "The one who helped me. I kept it for a long time, as if keeping cloth could keep a promise alive. It is yours now." I blinked hard. "I can't take that." "You can," he replied. "Promises are not cloth, they are choices. Let the cloak be used, let it be warm." We rode in quiet. The world was vast and white, the trees black lines against it. The path he'd cleared wound through drifts that would have swallowed my mule cart whole. Every so often I glanced at him, half expecting the legend to reassert itself, fangs, threat, something to justify fear. But he rode with patient steadiness, his eyes scanning the tree line not for prey but for danger. At the ridge where the road forked toward Larkhaven, he stopped. From here my town lay a day's ride south. Beyond the next rise I would be visible to travellers, to farmers, to anyone who might carry news. He did not cross that invisible boundary. He reined in his horse and remained where the shadow of the mountain fell. "This is far enough," he said. I slid from my saddle, the snow crunching under my boots. The cloak's weight felt like the weight of being trusted. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, and the words sounded small compared to what he'd done. Medicine, shelter, safety, and the quiet gift of being seen as more than a frightened intruder. He looked at the road leading away. "Go quickly," he said, as if that was all he wanted. Then, after a pause, he added, "When you return to your town, they will ask what happened. They will ask if I kept you, if I harmed you." I swallowed. What should I say? His eyes met mine, and for an instant I saw the shape of his sacrifice more clearly than ever. A man who could not clear his name without causing panic, who protected people who would never thank him, who carried their hatred because it kept them from facing something worse. "Say whatever keeps you safe," he said softly. "I do not need your defense." But I did not want to leave him with only that. The thought of him returning to the castle alone, to stand watch in halls that echoed with fear's stories, tightened something in me. "My sister," I said carefully, "makes little paper birds when she's well. She leaves them on windowsills so travellers know someone wishes them safe passage. If she recovers, I'll ask her to make one for your gate." He blinked as if the image surprised him. "A paper bird," he repeated, voice quiet. "Yes, it won't change the world's mind," I admitted, "but it will be there, something small, something true." For a long moment he did not speak. The wind moved around us, lifting fine snow like dust. Then he inclined his head once, a gesture that felt older than crowns. "That would be kind," he said, as if the word had not been spoken to him often. I hesitated, then did something bold in a way that did not feel dangerous. I stepped forward and held out my hand. He looked at it as if it were a flame, beautiful, perilous, offering warmth. Slowly he took it, his fingers cool but not icy. His grip was careful, measured, as if he were afraid of breaking something. "Thank you," I said again, letting the words carry everything I couldn't explain. He released my hand first, as if that was the safer ending. "Go Elowen hail," he said, "Mara is waiting." I rode away. When I looked back once, he was still there at the ridge, a dark figure against the white, watching until I dipped behind the rise and vanished from his sight. The ride home felt shorter than it should have, as if the road itself had been softened by relief. In Larkhaven, people stared at my cloak and my pale face. They crossed themselves. They asked questions in whispers that pretended not to be questions. "Did he hurt you?" someone murmured. "Did he drink from you?" another asked, eyes wide with a thrill they tried to hide. I could have told the truth plainly. I could have described the herb-scented bath and the open gate and the soup set down by a human hand. I could have spoken of the king standing watch outside my door like a guardian who expected no thanks. But I remembered his eyes when he said fear turned people into something they regretted. I remembered the quiet humility of his request, "Say what keeps you safe." So I said, "A storm stopped me. I found shelter on the mountain. I am home now." It was not a lie. It was simply not the whole shape of the truth. Mara's fever broke on the second day of the tincture. Her skin cooled. Her eyes cleared like a sky after rain. When she could sit up again, she asked why I looked so tired and why I wore a cloak that smelled like cedar and old snow. "One day," I told her, brushing her hair back, "I'll tell you about a man everyone calls a monster." Her small brow furrowed. Was he scary? I was scared, I admitted, but he was gentle. In the weeks that followed, Mara made paper birds. She made dozens because she was 8 and joy is excessive when it returns. She folded them from scraps of old letters, from clean sheets torn into squares, from pages of sermons no one needed anymore. On each bird she drew a tiny eye and a tiny wing, and sometimes a crooked smile. When the first thaw came and the roads softened, I climbed the ridge again with a satchel full of birds. I did not take a cart this time. I walked, feeling the mountain under my feet, remembering the path the king had cleared. The gate was open, as always. I tied the first bird to the iron bar with a strip of ribbon. It fluttered in the breeze, absurdly delicate against the heavy metal. I tied another, then another. Soon a small flock trembled there, white against black, as if the gate itself had grown a quiet, hopeful decoration. I did not see Alaric that day. Perhaps he watched from a window. Perhaps he stood unseen in the shadow of the arch, letting me have the moment without the burden of gratitude. As I turned to leave, a cup of tea appeared on the stone ledge by the gate, still steaming. No hand offered it, no voice called my name, just warmth waiting where the wind was sharpest. I took the cup between my hands and drank, and the heat spread through my fingers into my chest. Behind me, the castle remained what it had always been to the world, a dark shape on a ridge, a story to frighten children into staying close. But I knew now that fear could be wrong without being foolish. That sometimes people feared what they could not understand, and in that fear, they missed the quiet goodness standing watch in the night. I looked once more at the paper birds trembling on the iron. They were small. They would not end wars or change sermons or rewrite old legends. Yet they were real, and they were there, and they meant that somewhere behind the open gate lived a king who took hatred as payment for protection. I set the empty cup down, bowed my head toward the silent walls, and walked back down the mountain. The wind followed me, gentle as a hand at my back, and for the first time the story of the Vampire King felt less like a warning and more like a reminder. True kindness can exist behind fear, and sometimes it survives there, quiet, unseen, steadfast, until someone, by mistake or by need, steps into the warmth and finally notices. Title: She bathed in the Vampire King's chamber by mistake. Now he won't let her leave. Write a single complete fantasy story about a powerful vampire king who is feared by the world, yet quietly performs unseen acts of kindness, protection, or compassion. The tone must feel mysterious, emotional, and sincere, never cruel, violent, or dramatically exaggerated. Focus on hidden goodness, silent sacrifice, misunderstood identity, and gentle humanity rather than dark horror or domination. Tell the story as one continuous narrative that gradually reveals the king's true nature through meaningful actions, leading to a soft emotional resolution within a single video. Guidelines: begin the story with a calm emotional mystery that directly reflects the promise or feeling of the title, and quietly makes the viewer want to stay until the end. Begin with the world's fear or misunderstanding of the king. Reveal kindness slowly through small protective or merciful actions. Keep atmosphere calm, reflective, and emotionally warm rather than dark or brutal. Avoid graphic violence, torture, revenge drama, or shock twists. Let emotional impact grow through silence, choice, and sacrifice. End with a quiet realization that true kindness can exist behind fear. Writing style: clear, natural English suitable for calm narration. Smooth, medium-length paragraphs with human rhythm. No repetition, robotic phrasing, or multi-part cliffhanger structure. Length: write 1/802, 400 words, suitable for a 15-20-minute complete YouTube story. Now write the full standalone story in one continuous piece, with a gentle emotional tone, quiet mystery, and meaningful human warmth.